Hi, I'm Alex Leduc and welcome to WatchMojo.com. Today we're looking at Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau through the eyes of biographer John English. First of all, tell us about how you put this book together and all the access that you were awarded.
This is the second volume of a biography of Trudeau. The first volume ended in 1968 before we entered politics, and in that volume I relied largely on the private papers. This book is very different. Not only was he a public figure, but he was the Prime Minister of the country, and he served in that position for over 15 years. Accordingly, I had to use a lot of secondary works, books about him, books about events, but of course I used his private papers as well. It was surprising, some subjects didn't have standard histories. The National Energy Program, so little is known about it because there's no book on it, nothing since the 1980s. So I took that as a responsibility where I had to explain more because I couldn't send people off to a standard work on the subject.
How did Trudeau change the map of Canada?
To go back to the 60s and 70s, the tremendous dynamic of Quebec, for lack of a better term, modernization, the rise of separatism. Trudeau represented in Ottawa a way through which that was mediated. Without him there, I think we would have had a much different outcome. In another sense, he came to define for Canada a particular approach. It was that we stood outside the Reagan-Thatcher consensus. We were different, we were peacemakers. He wasn't a particular fan of peacemaking, but he was a fan of Scandinavia and human security network, as it later came to be called. He wanted to step aside from the Cold War. He produced a rhetoric that convinced many Canadians that that's who they were.
This volume starts in 1968 as Trudeau becomes Prime Minister. How is he different from other politicians of his time?
This guy was modern. He wore sandals, drove a Mercedes, and had the lingo of youth, and was very much representative of the 60s and what it seemed to represent. He was, as they said at the time, Canada's Kennedy, with all that represents. Camelot, glamorous women, intellectuals in the White House. He was new for Canada, and I think that's why Trudeau-mania developed, and Trudeau-mania was a real thing. He had a gift for the short, pithy phrase, so that's why he's quoted so often. But more importantly, he was a Prime Minister for over 15 years. He did have an enormous effect on Canada, but I think most of all, he was a personality that we can't forget. He stands out because of who he is. He was our celebrity.